So without any further ado, I'd like all of you to help me give a warm welcome to the Director of Technical Services for Williams, Mr. Nick Munoz.
Just the clicker.
Was working a second ago.
Tech never works.
I know.
Well, I'll start us off while we're figuring the clicker out. Want to thank you for that warm welcome, and really, thank you for participating in Appalachian Basin GPA. When I think about this group in particular, the group of professionals that have executed the development of this basin, really folks who have done superlative things together and really built something that is unique in the global oil and gas industry. And so just really proud to call myself a peer to you all, and really great to network here at this event today. To start off with, a little bit of what I've been thinking about from a Gas Processors Association standpoint. We were having an internal coordinating call yesterday talking about the value that GPA brings for us nationally, and trying to figure out ways to get our young professionals more engaged, in particular in these regional settings. And in different areas we weren't as lucky to have such an active organization as we have here in the Northeast and in the Appalachian Basin. So I do want to start off by just recognizing the board of directors, the executive committee, and all of the committee chairs who do all of this work. One thing that's very unique about GPA is, how heavy that burden is that's shouldered by volunteers. So give all those folks a round of applause if you would. So I'm hoping to warm up the room with some of that type of stuff and then set the bar really low for everyone else who's going to go today. So the frame up, we've presented on this topic various times nationally at GPA Midstream Convention. How it fits into the theme for today, which I was remiss in really identifying prior to coming today, so winging it a little. But when we think about process debottlenecking, it's really about doing things smarter and more efficient with existing assets. And that fits into themes especially around emissions reduction and our ESG efforts, because almost universally the projects that we do around debottlenecking and increasing the efficiency of our existing asset base also reduce our methane intensity, or our emissions intensity per unit volume moved or processed. So all of the things that I'll talk about today, this is more of a non-technical presentation talking about that, sort of the how of how we framed up these teams and really have scaled them across our company. All of these things, the things that we've done, the things that we've conceptualized, they've all, in addition to having a big impact on our return on capital, have universally been things that reduced our methane or CO2e intensity. So, quick introduction of myself. It'll be very, very brief. Started off in operations as an operations technician almost 16 years ago at Williams. A lot of stuff happened in the middle. Some of it I worked with Adam Tobia, who's over there at the C.J. Hughes booth, very early in my career in New Mexico. And now I get to lead our technical services team for gathering and processing across the U.S., basically from Wyoming to New York State. In the course of that, have had the opportunity to work in about 25 gas processing plants in about 8 different states, and have worked with technical professionals who've figured out how to, bring these solutions forward in a range of facilities of different ages, pedigrees, et cetera. So, again, really going to talk about the how more today. So when you go into the GPA archives, we've got some really great technical presentations of the work that we've done, working side by side with our great vendor and engineering firm partners, in particular around turbo expander debottlenecking, working with Blair Engineering. And then in the future, we're doing a lot of work today on acid gas treating debottlenecking in the Haynesville, and we hope to bring some of those to a future GPA event here in the next year or two. So, like I said, what I'm going to talk about today is really about is really about that how. So how do you put teams together that execute on these debottlenecking and efficiency increasing opportunities for facilities? The hard can be really difficult, or the how can be really difficult for, in particular areas like ours here in the Appalachian Basin. We're growth practitioners here, and we're very, very skilled in bolting on new capacity additions, new compressors, new turbo expander plants, new fractionation trains. The muscle memory wasn't there in particular for us in the Northeast around how do we get more out of those existing assets in place. But answering that question really, really allowed us to unlock a tremendous amount of value for the company, for our customers, for our shareholders. Sorry. So key thing to note, and I'll show you in the next slide, across the entire business, more than $100 million in benefits realized so far. That includes deferral of major capital additions, i.e. new process units. That includes being able to bring new revenue into existing systems earlier. So compelling case to do this in any facility, or take a hard look at it, any facility in the midstream industry. A great question many people ask me is, why would you share this if it's a source of competitive advantage? The way we think about it, as an industry, we're all trying to navigate the world of increasing or reducing our emissions footprint. And these have an impact on that. And definitely something that we want to share and hopefully helps enrich the larger industry. So at a glance, in some of the facilities, providing kind of a range here, because as you all know, these things are dependent on compositions and flows and different parameters. But across our processing fleet in the areas where we've applied these practices, we've seen a 20 to 30% increase in capacity. Around pipelines, from a hydraulic debottlenecking, we've seen a 5 to 15% increase. Around our de-ethanization fleet, some really cool stuff that I'll touch on a little bit again. Some of the technical papers from years past have more of the detail here, but a 50 to 60% increase. Similarly in that range for C3+ fractionation, and then, as I mentioned, we're seeing some really great things on treating. So that success boils down to, in a few bullets, that value is around capital avoidance, increased asset utilization, lower run rate expenses. When you do more with your existing asset base, there's always going to be variable costs at scale, but there's a lot of fixed cost avoidance when you're not bolting on new equipment. And of course, simpler operations. So when we talk about the how of putting these teams together, one of the first things is really chartering the team. And that kind of starts with a vision statement. For us, that mantra was, we're not going to build the last gas plant, meaning we're not going to build that last asset that has that lowest return on capital, the one that bears the brunt of the leading edge of decline, but rather that we're really going to challenge ourselves to look at our existing capacities and how we can unlock the potential there. So I think, bringing that type of vision statement is the beginning of that framework for chartering it. Having a charter document that really clearly defines the who that you're going to bring in is super important. And then when you're putting the team together, depending on your organization, it's really important to think about how you create a right-sized team that's really agile, but has the right players there. And that's important because, depending on the way your company's made up, you have different folks who are, have responsibility and ownership for major capital deployment, or may have, responsibility for, process engineering at a corporate level. It's important to get that involvement so that everybody's aligned and moving together, but also to be very deliberate in keeping the group small enough that they can make decisions quickly and operate within their technical delegation of authority to move things forward quickly. And for some of these projects that we've done, for reference, we've delivered these de-bottlenecking capacity increases in under 18 months, simply by having those small, agile, and leads into empowered teams. So think about that work of forming those teams, as really being about kind of setting up the dies for the machinery of working through that technical innovation and delivering solutions. And I'm sorry. The one thing I'd hit on, in addition to designing the team, that the mantra as leaders has to be empower, empower, empower. Set some boundaries around, you're always going to have a financial delegation of authority in a company that says this is who can authorize an X million-dollar capital outlay. But delegate to this team the technical decisions. And that includes not just the solution itself, but as importantly, vendor selection. And then, you're going to have to steer that team from a leadership standpoint, but make sure that that steering has a light touch that focuses around the vision and really helping them clear roadblocks, and let that team work. Don't intervene. One of the things that, I had to learn as we went through these processes was, for instance, was, you as a leader, you're thinking, well, I really want to get a blue chip consulting firm on these projects, so I ensure that when we bring a project forward, people have a lot of confidence in the work product. Having a light touch meant that when the team kind of said, hey, I don't think that we need to bring in this consultant and it's going to be disruptive, what we really need is some technical engineers maybe from the outside to do the work. Being able to kind of take that, provide that air cover, move forward that way. In our case, on one of our fractionator debottlenecking projects, that led to some great outcomes, some opportunities to debottleneck pump capacity that we probably wouldn't have seen either from a blue chip consulting firm or if we'd have done the work internally ourselves. And an identification of integrity issue that we were able to resolve that we probably would have missed on a heat exchanger. So let the team work. And then be really deliberate about what third parties you bring in that are going to accelerate productivity and not disrupt the work that's going on with the team. Sorry. A really key element, as you're building the team out, is ensuring that you have the right folks from operations who have that profound knowledge of the facility, that are there working with the third-party engineering firms, with your internal team, and helping to navigate through, the breaks between the model, the reality of the system, and then the reality in the field around what has to happen in order to execute projects. Sorry. Lastly, you know, a big, one of the most important steps in the process for us was developing holistic system models, you know, looking across not just individual plants, but across pipeline systems and interconnected facilities that we then used to target where the opportunities were to unlock that capacity. You know, good examples of that include kind of the right level of analysis around, the right level of analysis around, you know, not just kind of those core solutions that you're delivering, but then working those out into plant hydraulics, system hydraulics. That system approach allows you to find hidden thorns in the things that can kind of be deal breakers as you move forward. So allows you to see, you know, not just, you know, the retray that you're doing on a tower, but to see where you are going to run into an issue with control valve sizing or dehydrator sizing downstream. So the last thing that, you know, I would mention around putting these teams together is that approach has been super scalable for us. We were able to take this team design, you know, from our assets in the Northeast and stand up similar teams almost in every basin to look at specific needs in different areas, and have really seen those results start to feed through in our new developing areas, in our existing assets, you know, in sort of our legacy plays in the Rockies. So once you have a good design, that team composition of what roles from what parts of your organization need to be there, it's easy to scale it to other areas and say, hey, let's get these 5 people in the room. So kind of to conclude, really significant benefits from process debottlenecking. As I mentioned, there's emissions reductions implications across the board. And you know, how we started down the road was really around improving our return on capital. It increases our agility. So when we, you know, are confronted with, you know, bringing new volumes onto a system somewhere, instead of looking at the cycle times of new assets being put in place, now we think about, well, how do I deliver solutions that debottleneck what I have already? So there's a speed to market advantage. Putting those teams together has other benefits just in building networks across the organization that then are durable and then can continue to share best practices that reach out to each other for assistance when emergent conditions arise. And really, you know, if I were to summarize, it's each of these has been kind of a moonshot, you know, project that pulls other improvements along with it. You know, builds the right teams in the process of approaching the issues. You know, establishes new ways of people collaborating and working together effectively. So really been a great process for us and something that has enriched our technical life at Williams. And with that, I'll close and see if there's any questions. Okay.
How has, with all the pressure to reduce emissions, how has debottlenecking favorably impacted that?
Yeah, so we began tracking our methane emissions, you know, reductions against a baseline several years back. And, you know, initially we really thought that we'd be focusing on different opportunities to reduce, like blowdowns and things like that. And those are still also low-hanging fruit that's there. But what we also saw, especially as we started thinking about intensity measures versus absolute reduction measures, that increasing the efficiency of our existing facilities was really going to have a huge impact there. So today, I'll talk more broadly about our emissions reduction approach. We've kind of built a funnel, prioritization funnel around emissions reductions that, starts from the lowest hanging fruit up, starts from, there's zero cost opportunities that are there. There's operating practice opportunities. There's, us, improving the way that we report opportunities, fuel gas calculations, things like that, that are low cost. There's, validation opportunities where we look at different leak rate assumptions for pipelines. Those have all been sort of in that low cost category to start, and then we work our way kind of up that capital ladder. These types of projects fall into that lower CapEx per unit reduction, and they're justified on other parameters, right? This is just for these types of projects kind of gravy. There's other, relatively low cost projects that we've done, not to get too off topic, where, when we look at lower pressure gas starters, that or higher torque gas starters that allow us to start at higher pressures so we don't have to do full blowdowns, we can do partial blowdowns. There's a number of opportunities like that, and then you just keep working your way up the ladder. In Colorado today, we are working towards a very significant reduction where we're having to do re-horsepowering and much more capital intense things today. But in other states, really starting from that low-hanging fruit, we made significant reductions. The example that I would give, and again, kind of off topic, but starting from a 2018 baseline, I think through 21, we made a 25% reduction in methane, absolute reduction in methane emissions for our Northeast assets, and really did that, with pretty minor capital outlays, under $5 million. So things like blowdown reductions, things like incinerators, things that reduced our total methane emissions. So definitely when I think about my role, our role at Technical Services Group, which we deal in that kind of tactical space, there's a lot of lower dollar opportunities out there that I think people are not cognizant of. I think people latch onto, we talk about emissions reduction, people really latch onto, well, I'm gonna have to go spend, $50 million to change out all the units at a facility. Don't think as much about that. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit to work through, and there's a lot still left for us.
So you were talking a lot about lowering the methane content. What advantages does that give you? I'm coming at it from, I'm a power plant person, so I'm considering renewable natural gas. I know somebody's speaking on renewable natural gas later, but in order to qualify for incentives for renewable natural gas, you have to have a high methane content. So I just was wanting to understand what.
Yeah, so when I talk about methane emissions, or really CO2e emissions reductions, most of these projects impacted fuel emissions. So fuel emissions per unit volume process, or fuel utilization per unit volume process. So on our expander plants, basically we worked with a vendor that had just a very high efficiency, novel design, and that reduced or increased the recovery. That's a horsepower recovery piece of equipment, so it increased the efficiency of that piece of equipment by 40%, and in so doing, reduced the amount of fuel that we were burning downstream of it.
Okay.
So.
Okay. That makes sense. Thanks.
Okay. Well, I thank you for your time, and look forward to the rest of the day. Thank you all.